We are standing by. The voice of God, Larry Jordan. Oh, I'm so sorry. All right, the very first time you start Final Cut 10, this is what the screen looks like.
House lights.
There are 3 main sections and 3 hidden sections to the interface. This is the viewer. It's context sensitive, and it shows us the picture of what we're looking at. To the left is what we used to call the browser. It now has 2 elements. This is the event library, the collection of all the different media that we work with, and the event browser, which is where media for an individual event is displayed. Below it is the timeline. The timeline has 3 sections. This is a section called the project library, where you have access to all of your projects. And then when you create a project, it shows up inside the timeline. There are several smaller windows, which we'll see as we go through, which includes audio meters and the inspector, which is where we make changes. There's scopes. There's a bunch of small stuff. But the main interface is a single, unified interface consisting of the viewer, where we view stuff, the browser, where we store stuff, and the timeline, where we build stuff. Now, if we look at these choices, this choice, these 3 options, only show up the very first time you start the application. Once you start the application, this choice, Import iMovie Events, goes away, and we have 2 other choices, Import Files and Import from Camera. If you are shooting tapeless, and the rule of thumb is to take the card that you shoot in the camera, copy the entire contents of the card to a folder on your hard disk, and then you'll import from camera because it is not yet in a form which is readable by your computer. If you have QuickTime movies, you'll import files. So these are the 2 you're going to be using the most. This is Command-I, and that's Shift-Command-I. Notice over here on the left-hand side, I have 2 hard drives. I've got the internal drive to my Mac, and as you can see over here, let me just slide that out of the way, I've got a second drive, which is a small portable that's attached via FireWire 800 to my computer. Although Final Cut defaults to storing projects and events on your boot drive, just as with Final Cut 7, this is a serious mistake, and you want to avoid doing so. However, your boot drive is the only drive that Final Cut actually knows exists, so that, just like in Final Cut 7, it wants to store media there. You just have to convince it to store it somewhere else. The way you do that is you click on the name of your hard drive. This now says, I want my events stored on this drive. Go up to the File menu, go and create a new event. Now remember, an event is simply a collection of media. And I've now created a new event. We're going to call this, let's see, I've got some clips from Pond 5, so I'm going to call these the Pond 5 clips. So I've now created a new event. The event is stored inside this second drive, because that's what I had selected when I created the new event, and I gave it a name the way that you would name any bin or any sequence inside Final Cut. Once you've created it, now we get to pull the files in, and you get to guess. Are we pulling in iMovie events? The answer is no. Are we pulling it in from the camera? The answer is no, because they're already on my hard disk. So we click on Import Files. For those of you who are allergic to on-screen buttons, we can also go up to the File menu and go down to Import, and there, Shift-Command-I is the ability to import a file. So this is the import dialog, and this is different, because what Final Cut allows us to do is to not only import the files, but to do some initial analysis on them at the same time. And I've stored these files over here on my portable drive in a folder called Media, somewhere, Media Samples, and then I got to double-click it. So excited, I can't keep track of what's going on. There we go, Pond 5 clips. I'm going to select the entire folder, so I bring it everything all at one time. Notice I didn't have to say import a folder or import files, I just say import. Now, at this point I can say, where do I want to store these? I could store it to the event I just created, create a new event, whichever I prefer. In this case, I'm going to store it inside Pond 5, because I got to store somewhere. I'm going to store it inside Pond 5. This is the interesting stuff down here. If you're a long-time editor, that spends their life organizing files, and every folder has a name, and every folder is stored perfectly, then you don't want to copy the files, because Final Cut will point to those files wherever they're stored. If, on the other hand, organization is something that you really would rather avoid, then copy, because what it does is it takes the file from wherever it's stored on whatever drive and loads it into the Final Cut Events folder, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. Metadata is built in throughout the application. Metadata is simply data about your clips, and if one of the pieces of metadata that you want is the name of the folder the clip is stored in, then check this. Metadata doesn't cost anything, doesn't take any extra time. My feeling is leave this checked. If you're dealing with a variety of different formats, some of it's XD-CAM, some of it's DVC Pro HD, some of it's AVC HD, some of it's AVC CAM, some of it's P2, some of it's AVC Intra, you're going nuts trying to figure out what the heck it is you're doing, then you click on Create Optimized Media. What Final Cut will do is it will convert all your different files into a single format, specifically ProRes 422, which gives you much faster render times, much better background processing, much faster exporting, all because it's working with ProRes. The only disadvantage is your file sizes increase, because ProRes is a fairly large file, so you're going to need a little bit more storage, but the benefits of speed and performance and color correction in a ProRes environment are superior to non-ProRes, especially H.264 or AVC HD. Create Optimized Media is a good thing. If you're someone that has lots and lots of media, say you're working on a reality program, or you're working on a horror show, and you want to be able to edit this stuff offline, you can create proxy media. This creates a second copy of your media at a lower data rate, a file size which is 1/3 the size of the optimized media, which allows you to then store this to, say, the drive of a laptop, and you can do all of your editing on a laptop. Proxy media is always a second clip. So you have your original, that's clip 1, optimized, that's a copy of the original, and proxy, that's a copy again, so you'd end up with 3 versions of the file. Final Cut will automatically analyze for image stabilization, shaky shots, and rolling shutter, and I've got a really good example of a rolling shutter if we have time to see it today. The problem is these take forever, and my recommendation is don't analyze for stabilization or rolling shutter. You will never, ever get out of background processing mode. Leave these off. You can analyze for them manually later. Color balance, I would also suggest leaving off, and finding people. It's nice to know that you've got close-ups and wide shots, but I found it to be inaccurate, and I found it to be slow, so my recommendation is leave these guys off. The audio analysis I recommend turning on. 1, it's extremely fast. 2, any changes that it suggests can be overridden by the user. So the way that I have my stuff set, if you want to know my setup, is I will copy the files to the Final Cut Events folder. I'll create optimized media, which solves the whole issue of cross-format file handling, and I'll turn on all the audio choices and leave everything else off. Once you've made those choices, click Import. And Final Cut will go off and start to import these files, and after like seconds, well, theoretically I shouldn't see 3 of the same kind, I should see multiples, but we'll get there. Notice that what I've got is I've got all of my files are already starting to come into the application. Even though they've not yet been copied, even though they've not yet been optimized, I still have access to the files. If timestamps are important to you, they're time-stamped automatically. Frankly, I don't care about timestamps, so I go down to this little menu right down here with the gear and say, I want them grouped by disk, but I don't want them arranged. I just want to have them, don't group events by date, and go over to here and say, let's see, I'll turn that off. There we go. So what we're seeing, see this little spinning circle down here? This is what makes the magic of Final Cut. When you click it, it opens up the background processing. This shows that it's making copies of it in the background, that it's importing media in the background, it's doing rendering in the background, it's doing exporting in the background, and the status of all this is visible in this little spinning wheel down here. It's 70% done or 80% done. Even though it's still doing its thing, I can play any of these clips Once we get there we go. I can skim across it. I've got full access to every single file that's here, even though it's doing all this background processing. And it's probably going to cook and hum and whistle for a while, but that's okay. I can still start editing. So an event is a collection of media. We can import media from a file. We can convert the media into a common file format. And we've seen that background processing makes my life a whole lot easier, because now I don't have to wait for a file to be complete. It's done, even though it's working in the background, I can still edit. Which means I have to create a project. Just as we select the hard drive that we want to put our media on, we have to select the hard drive we want to store our project on. And again, I have two hard drives. I've got the second, which is my portable, and I've got the main hard drive. So I'm going to select the portable drive, because again, I don't want to store projects or media on the boot drive. The boot drive needs to be left for the operating system and for the application. Data always belongs on a second drive. So I select it, and I go up to the File menu, and I say I want to create a new project, and exactly the same in Final Cut 7. It's Command-N, and there's a new project. What are you going to call it? I'm going to call it the FCPX project. It's like a Robert Ludlum novel, except better name. Now, projects have to be linked to a collection of events because it's a database. There's got to be a way of connecting these two databases. So you have to specify which database you want to connect it to. In this case, I'm going to connect it to Pond 5. However, if I had, say, 25 events on my system, I could take a clip from every single event. I just need to have it linked to one for database maintenance purposes. But once that link is done, then I can pull media from anywhere, because all of your projects and all of your events are always online, unless you know the secret tip. And this secret tip is so important that you need to tell your friend to write it down. There is a wonderful utility that Phil Hodgetts has published at Intelligent Assistance called Event Manager 10. It costs $4.99. I cannot live without this application. It does such a great job of event management and project management that as soon as you start to create more than 2 events and 2 projects, you need the application. And Philip is not paying me to say this. I use it on an hourly basis. It handles the whole issue of why do I have to have all of my media online at one time? You don't. Event Manager solves it. Apple may come around to writing something, but right now Event Manager 10 is great. The other problem that we've got is a preference setting which is set weirdly. I like video properties set automatically. This is exactly what happens in Final Cut 7, where you drop a clip to the timeline for the first time. It says, do you want to change the sequence settings to be able to conform to your project? And we all say yes. That's exactly what the top radio button's doing. The bottom radio button shows the problem. Notice that by default, it's creating all of our audio as a surround mix. I don't do surround mixes, I do stereo mixes. So whenever I create a new project, I always click on the custom button, set it to stereo. The rest of these choices are perfect. You just don't want to waste the space and the time to do a surround mix, because I'm not outputting surround mixes, especially if I'm going to the web. So you give it a name, you link it to a project, you link it to an event, collection of media, leave this set to the default, change that to custom to set stereo, click OK. And after a few seconds, we now have our project. So let's create something here. Let's start with a sunset. First thing that we want to do is we want to find a clip that we want to edit down, and inside the event browser, notice that I've got something unusual going on. I'm moving my mouse back and forth inside a thumbnail. The thumbnail is automatically updating, and I see the viewer change because the viewer is context sensitive. It shows me whatever I'm rolling this skimmer across. There's actually 2 ways to view a clip. One is the skimmer, which I'm not holding the mouse button down. I'm just simply dragging it left and right. And the other is with the playhead, which is what we're used to. Hit the space bar, and I'm now playing the clip. Spacebar to stop, spacebar to start. Some people think the skimmer is the worst thing that's ever been invented since the beginning of time, and other people like the skimmer. I think most of the time, for previewing clips, the skimmer is phenomenal. I like it a great deal. But you can turn it off. See this button right here? The skimmer starts with the letter S. The letter S toggles the skimmer on and off. If that symbol right there is blue, the skimmer's on. If that's gray, the skimmer is off. We can also skim audio, and so we can turn the audio skimmer on and off. In this case, I'm going to turn the audio skimmer off, leave the video skimmer on for just a little bit longer.